Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, I thought that I would give my little fight review and my fight breakdown of the Vergil Ortiz versus Erickson Lubin fight. And I know that this is coming a little bit late. I probably should have released this about an hour or two ago because, of course, for those of you that did not end up hearing the results, Vergil Ortiz ended up getting the knockout, I believe, within that of 2 rounds flat. So Vergil Ortiz, of course, had a very, very impressive performance. And I believe that I did predict Vergil Ortiz to win, but I will state that I did expect this fight to go a little bit longer. Now, maybe that was also a little bit because of my own ignorance, because I thought that Vergil Ortiz, that this was only his second fight here at 154, so I thought that maybe he was still adapting here a little bit more, and I'm sure that he still is. But Vergil Ortiz, now that I remember, I believe that this is at least his third fight here, if not his fourth fight here, because I totally forgot that he also fought that one bigger Ukrainian fighter who's absolutely huge for the 154-pound weight class. I believe his name is Sergey Bochuk or something like that, where they had pretty much a life and death fight against each other. So Vergil Ortiz has probably been adapting here actually for a little bit now, at least for that of the past year. But that being stated, of course, this was looked at as a fight that could have went either way from a lot of people. Of course, a lot of people take a look at Erickson Lubin as being quote unquote underrated and someone overall that, had the potential to maybe upset the apple cart or, overall wreck, the possible odds in this fight. But this pretty much was a fight overall to where as long as Vergil Ortiz was going to take Erickson Lubin seriously, which in my view it was obvious that he was, there pretty much wasn't going to be a massive problem. I thought that maybe there was going to be some competitive moments, but I did not really expect Erickson Lubin to really pull off the victory, not unless he just really landed the correct shot. And, I'm also going to state certain things in here about Erickson Lubin, and in no way am I trying to be, crude or mean or anything like that, or, overly critical or hypercritical. But to be quite honest with you, I think that it's about time that Erickson Lubin retires. Because, before this, it was already kind of looked at as a good contender versus that of an actual great contender. But the truth is that this was a great fighter versus maybe at best a good fighter. Erickson Lubin has never really been on the level, in my personal view, that many people have kind of stated that he has been, and he's never really been on the level that he thought he was on. Erickson Lubin, pretty much every time that he's fought an actual A grade level fighter, he pretty much has folded like a lawn chair, and the fights either A have not lasted that long, or he ended up getting beat up so badly that his face was pretty much unrecognizable. And I think that it's about time, and I know that he's only about 30 years old, 30, 31 years old, but I think that it's really time that this man really thinks about retirement. Because, I mean, pretty much ever since the Jamel Charlo fight, we've seen pretty much the peak level of that of an Erickson Lubin. And I get it that it's always important to have a high level of self belief and everything like that. But at the end of the day, someone might need to have a conversation or sit him down and say, listen, you might have to think about this because you don't want to be 50, 60 some years old, slurring your words, and having a certain amount of brain damage. Because Erickson Lubin, if we're just going to be very blunt and very harshly honest, he's not someone that really belongs in the ring with that of a Vergil Ortiz. Now, before this fight, of course, I stated that, for those of you that watch the NFL, there's a code, or excuse me, not a code, but there's a phrase known as a quote unquote trap game. And basically, what a trap game means is that this is a game that you could very much potentially lose, but on the surface, to many people, appears to be a game that you more than likely should win and that you're, the more than likely to have your favorite to win. But if you're not careful because of that team, whether they're on a streak or just because they're a tough team, or maybe they clash with your style in the perfect type of way to where they can win, you could potentially fuck up the game and you could potentially lose. So this was kind of an example of a quote unquote trap fight if Vergil Ortiz did not take this fight seriously. Lubin is a little bit elusive. He's someone that has a very long reach. He's very powerful. But if Vergil Ortiz was going to take this fight seriously, it pretty much was only going to end up in one way, and that's with Vergil Ortiz getting the victory. Because anyone, of course, who pretty much knows what they're watching, as well as also knowing the track record of both of these fighters, Vergil Ortiz is an example of a truly great fighter. Now, I don't know how far he's going to go in his career. I don't know if he's going to defeat Jaron Butzenis or how many of the titleists he's going to defeat at 154. But let's just say, for example, that Jaron Butzenis was not there at the current moment in time. I would favor him over every single one of those title contenders. I'm not quite sure if Erickson Lubin could defeat any of them. And there were certain people that, overall, I believe that there was one person in my latest video that asked me, and they said, well, where do you put Erickson Lubin in terms of a fighter? What's your level of, him? Because I place him as a B plus level fighter because he's very talented, but he just can't ever seem to get the job done. Well, this is just my personal view of it. There are definitely, many levels of different fighters, but when you talk about, for example, an A minus level fighter, what an A minus level fighter can do for me, or in my personal view, they at the very least can beat a multitude of champions or former champions, or they can defeat at least, a couple of other A minus level fighters, at least debatable A minus level fighters, or they never lose to a B grade level fighter, or they could become a multi-time champion. That's what you have to be in order to be an A minus level fighter for me. So who am I talking about there? I'm talking about Jamel Charlo. I'm talking about Danny Garcia. I'm talking about Sean Porter. Those are guys in my personal view that are A minus level fighters. Maybe a Joseph Parker. That's another great example. Excuse me. Those are certain guys that I would claim are quote unquote A minus level fighters. Joseph Parker, you could even debate maybe as A grade because to be honest, I kind of thought that he got a bit screwed over in his last fight against Wardley. But I mean, it is what it is. But the point is that those are A minus level fighters. When you talk about B plus level fighters, that means that they're just a level below that of the A minus level fighters. So those are fighters that are more than likely never going to beat an A grade level fighter, or if they do, it's only going to be one performance in their lifetime. But they could still become a champion, and at least in certain A minus level fights, they're at least going to give it a go, or they can at least survive the fight. So who am I talking about there? I'm talking about Tony Harrison. I'm talking about Adrian Broner. I'm talking about, Victor Postal. Those are the guys that I'm talking about. Because at least Postal was able to get the win over Matisse. At least Broner was a multi-time champion, and at least he was able to survive Sean Porter and Mikey Garcia and some of those guys. At least he was able to survive those. But the truth is about Erickson Lubin is that every time he's been in a big A grade level fight, he pretty much has gotten his ass kicked. I mean, in that fight against Jamel Charlo, overall he ended up getting, completely clocked to the point to where it looked like he got hit with a taser gun, and basically it looked like one of the scariest knockouts in recent history. Then he fights out of a Sebastian Fondora, and the man gets beat up literally so bad that his face is completely unrecognizable. I mean, shit, the man suffered so much damage. If there was a reenactment of the Emmett Till movie, he would have been the perfect casting member of the dead body. I mean, shit. So the point is that, and I'm not trying to be, crude or mean there, but the point is overall is that Erickson Lubin, there was all this talk by certain people about, overall, well, he's underrated in this and he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. And it kind of showed a little bit from Erickson Lubin, I think, a little bit in the sit down. I believe that Todd Grisham kind of brought up something that Erickson Lubin stated that he thought that Vergil Ortiz's career, that it was a little bit orchestrated. And basically, what was Erickson Lubin meaning by that? He means that, Vergil Ortiz is someone that is getting a little bit more of promotion than what he believes that he deserves, and someone that has gotten certain opportunities or that his career, overall has kind of been made for him. But the thing is about Mr. Erickson Lubin, the thing that he doesn't realize is that he ended up getting opportunities overall before that of a Vergil Ortiz. He got a Jamel Charlo fight very early on. Then you got a fight against Sebastian Fondora, I believe, when he was undefeated. Then he also got other opportunities against Jesus Ramos, where really you got hand-wrapped that decision because that really was a robbery, that fight that did not belong to you, and then you ended up getting an opportunity against Jason Rosario. So the point is that Erickson Lubin, he can complain about not getting opportunities or not getting the credit that he deserves, but the truth is, bro, what have you done in your career? Every time that you fought a true A grade level fighter, you pretty much have clearly lost, other than that one robbery that you got over Jesus Ramos. And once again, I'm not stating this to be mean in any way, but the reason why I claim this overall is because there's so many fighters or so many athletes overall that always claim certain things like this guy gets way too much attention, or this guy overall is an industry plant, or they're orchestrated, or why does he get more money or more opportunities than me? Well, more than likely, 9 times out of 10, the reason why that is because A, they're better than you, and B, they bring a package to the table that you will never bring. It just is what it is. And Erickson Lubin is someone that is very talented, but he was never skilled enough, and he was never good enough to ever actually compete with true championship level fighters. And I don't think that he would have even beat some of the weaker champions that I've seen there in recent history. I'm not even quite sure if he would have beaten that of a Brian Gastano. I can assure you that he probably would have not beaten that of a Brian Gastano. So, I mean, it just is what it is. Because there's no offense against Lubin, but you kind of were around in one of the weaker eras within that of the 154-pound weight class. And I know that a lot of people will say, what are you talking about? Jamel Charlo was in a deep division, all sort of stuff. Well, it was deep with B grade level fighters when Jamel Charlo really was around. The main talent that really would have been a major threat to him was pretty much the guy that got his career ended by Jason Rosario, because Julian J. Rock Williams was someone that was always very talented, but always very inconsistent. He did not have the best of chins, and he was always someone that was a little bit inconsistent and could be a little bit too hittable, and it would cost him in certain fights. You just never know what type of performance you were going to get from J Rock. But pretty much, excuse me, pretty much since then, the only real threat after that was really, I mean, a Tony Harrison and also that of a Brian Gastano. And Tony Harrison was really not meant to be a threat in the first place, but because Jamel Charlo really is only about an A- level fighter, he ended up losing one of those fights, and even in the rematch, it pretty much was a life and death fight. It is what it is. But once again, not to digress too much here, but the point is that Erickson Lubin is someone that, of course, always had talent, but he was just someone, in my view, that in terms of a peak level, he was pretty much about a B- to B grade level fighter. He was a B grade level fighter, even at his absolute best. And to be quite honest with you, that's being a little bit generous. Because after the performances that you had over Charlo and Ortiz now, the fact that you got knocked out within the first couple of rounds over him, that was not supposed to happen. At least not if you were supposed to be on the level that you alleged that you were. So it is what it is. But once again, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm not trying to, once again, overall be hypercritical, but I think that it's really time that he thinks about retirement, because the man is taking a lot of punishment and he's starting to get knocked out fairly easily, and he's only 30 years old. So I just, it's time. It is what it is. As for Vergil Ortiz, once again, excuse me, he's someone that comes across to me as very talented. And that's why I say this fight was an example of a very good contender that was kind of pretending to be a great contender versus an actual great contender. And then, we see multiple fights like these where we see certain fighters overall that think that they're entitled to something that, overall that they're truly not. Then they get in the ring with an actual fighter that deserves those things because of the talent and the work that they put in. And I'm not claiming that Lubin did not put in work, but he's just not talented like a Vergil Ortiz. It just is what it is. He's someone that is very good, but he's never going to be someone overall, once again, that is great. Vergil Ortiz is great. He's someone that, in my personal view, could potentially make the top 10 pound for pound list. To be quite honest with you, Jaron Boots-Ennis, other than Jaron Boots-Ennis, there's really no major threat to Vergil Ortiz, in my personal view, in that weight class. I would favor him over every champion there. I would favor him over Fondura, although he's someone that maybe you could debate as A minus, partially because he's just so big for that weight class. He's kind of a little bit of a weight bully in my view, but he's also someone that has a great output and someone that can be technical and someone overall that does have a very piston-like jab. So you got to be very careful. Xander Zayas is someone that is relatively talented, but he's shown in his most recent performances that he's not someone that has the most amount of power. He cannot really get opponents out of there. And on top of that, he's just a little bit too hittable and he can be overwhelmed. I don't see him lasting long, especially against Boots or that of an Ortiz, but we'll see what happens. Of course, you have that one Russian fighter there that knocked out Timzu Murtazaliev, or whatever his name is. He's someone that probably is the most dangerous champion there at the moment, but I also don't see him lasting long. He appears to be a little bit too stiff and sloppy with some of his strikes, but I mean, we'll see what happens, because the only big fight that I've really ever seen him in was against Tim Tszyu, so we could still see maybe what he does in other fights. I'm not really quite sure. And then, of course, there's that new fighter from Germany, but I just don't know enough about him to comment. But my personal view, at least from what I've seen from that weight class, I just don't see any other fighters truly being the king of that weight class other than Jaron Boots-Ennis or Vergil Ortiz. So the question is, of course, is when are we going to get that fight? Because that, of course, is going to be a very interesting fight. And Vergil Ortiz, in my view, does have a great chance to defeat that of a Jaron Boots-Ennis. I'm not quite sure if I would favor him over Jaron Boots-Ennis, but if Vergil Ortiz somehow ended up winning that fight, I would not be surprised. Because one thing I will state is this: Vergil Ortiz is a very defensively responsible fighter. He is sometimes, in my view, used on the high guard a bit too often, maybe a little bit too active with it, but he's someone overall that has great defense and does move when he needs to. So he's someone that you got to give a lot of credit to. He is an extraordinarily, talented fighter, as well as Jaron Boots-Ennis as well. But it's just kind of hard to tell exactly how that fight's going to go, because I don't think Vergil Ortiz has ever really fought someone with the style of a Jaron Boots-Ennis before, and with his talents. And Jaron has definitely never fought someone as talented as that of a Vergil Ortiz. And on top of that, he's never really fought anyone that's ever really been that good other than Ayamantas Stanionis. So, I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell, but, that fight, of course, would be a great fight, and we'll just kind of see what ends up happening there. But that being stated overall, that's, we'll see. That pretty much is going to be about it. But just to kind of talk, for my ending thoughts and notes for that of this fight, the fight pretty much went down how I thought it was going to go once again. Vergil Ortiz, for any of us that know what we're watching, Ortiz is just someone that very clearly is the more multi-dimensional fighter. He has more layers to his game. Erickson Lubin is someone that can fight very well in the mid-range or the long range, but once you start to mix it up with him, once you really start to give him different looks, especially up against the ropes, he's pretty much lost and he pretty much crumbles up into a little shell. And that, of course, was not going to work against Ortiz. He's too powerful, he's too exceptional, and overall, he's just too good of a boxer. And of course, once he landed that good right hand that put Erickson Lubin in trouble, Erickson, the minute that he was always put up against the ropes, even when Ortiz was actually starting to outbox him in certain times within that of the mid range, with that of the lead hand jab, basically Erickson Lubin was lost ever since then. He had no answers, and once he was put up against the ropes, he was not going to have any answers, which is pretty much what I had predicted, because that's really what I had seen from Erickson Lubin in all of his fights. That's just how it was. But anyways, the point is that, the fight pretty much went down how I thought it was going to go. I did think it was at least going to last, anywhere from 5 to 7 rounds. But I'm not really super surprised because Vergil Ortiz was probably a bit more adjusted to the, to the junior middleweight division than what I thought. And on top of that, he is an exceptional level fighter. And Lubin is someone that, A, does not really have that great of a chin, and B, is someone that just stays up against the ropes way too long. And I think that it's really time that he thinks about retirement, but we'll see what ends up happening. Anyways, that being stated, that's really about it for this. I will be talking about the up-and-coming UFC fight card that will be happening next week, as well as some of the other fight cards that will be happening. David Benavidez versus Anthony Yarde in my fight prediction, and of course Devin Haney versus Brian Norman Jr. as well. And Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, I believe, fights soon too. There's a lot of fights to talk about, so it'll be very exciting. But that being stated, that pretty much is about it. We'll see what ends up happening. Great performance by that of Vergil Ortiz, and of course wishing a very good recovery to that of an Erickson Lubin. But we'll see what ends up happening. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.